Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you again to Lauren Malach. She is a coach that helps disengaged executives and mid-career professionals regain a sense of direction, self-belief, and agency in their career through her wayfinding method. A wayfinding method sounds fascinating, and I think that I think we're all going through a bunch of change. We've got the last 2 years of a pandemic, of working from home, or at least in a hybrid. We've been traumatized, at least I have, by probably lots of you are, but by almost revisiting World War II on our screens every night. Thank God we're not living in Ukraine, but I've interviewed so many people from Ukraine, and it's unbelievable that people are living through just such an unbelievable experience. And we, to a certain extent, thank God, are not living through it, but we're seeing it day in and day out on our TV screens. We've got inflation that we haven't had in 30 years. We got interest rates that are going up. We've got people that are saying that the housing market's going to go up or sideways or down, that we're maybe headed for a recession, or no, we've got the lowest unemployment level in history. We've got some people talking about the great resignation and the gig economy, where everyone's leaving the corporate world and wanting to go out and work for themselves. So I thought it'd be really good during this time period where we're all going through a bunch of struggles to talk to someone who's an expert in dealing with these struggles and has a business in helping people in this regard. And that's Laura Malach. And Laura, I follow you on LinkedIn, and you post some incredibly interesting posts on a fairly regular basis. And one of the ones that you posted most recently really spoke to me, because it was interesting, because you talked about that you're renovating your dining room and that some of the same things that applied to how you thought about your dining room apply to life. And you said, how do you want your life to feel? Free, healthy, interesting, sustainable, balanced, meaningful? And you, I guess, were saying those are the questions you asked about your dining room, and that people should be asking about their life. So tell me, what did you come to a conclusion on in regards to your dining room, and more importantly, your life?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you picked that one out. What did dining rooms and life have in common? Well, as a metaphor, they can potentially have a lot in common, especially when you're thinking about making changes. And you think about, what would I like to be different? What's the outcome I want here? Like, when the room is done, how do I want it to feel? And the way an interior designer will shape the room based on what you want to create is the same way that we can make changes in our lives to get the outcome that we want. So for the dining room in particular, I wanted it to be easy to live in, but also beautiful. I wanted it to feel calm. I wanted it to feel graceful, but I also wanted to know that my kids could, sit in the chairs and I wouldn't have to worry about ruining it. So it had to be, practical. Yeah, exactly. And I realized in what the designer was asking me was very much what I would ask my clients in terms of what future they're trying to build toward.
And so did you ask
Everyone
those
has their
questions?
own words, right? In fact, those were the words you read are kind of what I would choose, but not necessarily what other people would choose.
And so how did you answer those questions?
For the dining room or for my life?
Both.
Yeah. Well, for the dining room, I just brainstormed. And in that case, I had to brainstorm with my partner because we have to share the room. So we had to find the terms that we could agree on together. And I suppose that's true for life as well. When I was thinking about my career transition and my career change, the words that I came up with were autonomy, engagement, freedom, community, human development. Those were the kind of words I came up when I was thinking about changing my career. So it's a great exercise for anyone that is thinking about what they want to change to really get some key core fundamental terms that describe what they want to build.
It's interesting. You talked about autonomy, freedom, engagement, community, not money, not vice president, not CEO, which were sort of the typical conclusions or aspirations that most people would have had previously. But yet lots of commentary in the newspapers and magazines and news shows is that we're going through this great resignation, that people are thinking a lot more about autonomy and freedom and community and stuff like that. Do you think our workplace has changed and our attitudes toward work have changed maybe during this pandemic or maybe just because of evolution in history?
I think I believe our attitudes to work have changed. And I think it's very much a result of, the context we live in, as you described it, so well at the beginning of the show. I think that the way that we work in this kind of knowledge economy, evolved knowledge economy, is challenging. And people feel that they have options, and the options aren't always for bigger, better, more. Sometimes the options are for less, more sustainable, and more meaningful. So, but everyone has their own, desires for what they want. Some people do want more. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a little visitor who's home. Go on.
I gave that. I made that card for you.
Thank you.
More sustainable.
Yes, more sustainable, more time for moments like that, I guess you could say.
Wonderful. We're chatting today with Lauren Malach about mid-career, about professional change, about career change, about what we want in life, particularly, I guess, from a job, but also from the rest of life. With Laura Malach, who is a coach in that regard. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Lauren, I apologize, in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Lauren Malach. She is a coach for mid-career professionals and other professionals that are going through change in life and trying to figure out what they want. And we just had a really interesting conversation about using the dining room that she has been redecorating, remodeling and redesigning as a parable, I guess it is, for how you think about redesigning your life. The other thing that I thought was really kind of interesting that you posted recently was some questions that you had as an interviewer on people's strengths. And you said that you usually get a predictable answer when you ask people what are their strengths, which is I'm either really good with people or I'm really good with numbers or something like that. But that you suggested that we need to be able to answer the question better, that our strengths are more abundant and specific than boilerplate. And you went through a couple of steps that you wanted to suggest to people about how they could go trying to figure out what their strengths are. Could you sort of run us through what that process might be?
Absolutely. So, the good news is there's lots of ways to name and identify your strengths. And one of the easiest is to ask people who know you, people who, have worked with you, people who have lived with you, people who are your friends, who see you from another perspective, and to ask them what they admire about you, what they'd come to you for advice or guidance, what they think your best qualities are. And I think people are, not necessarily surprised, but touched probably by what others observe in them. Right. And that sometimes we can't see in ourselves. So that's a really quick and easy way to kind of get another take on your strengths.
I like the process that you stated here. It's step one, pick 3 trusted people who know you pretty well. Step 2, ask them if they'll help identify your strengths. Step 3, if they say yes, send them a few of the questions to think about and respond to, including, what am I good at? What kinds of issues would you seek my help with? Which positive character traits do you notice in me? What are my top 3 talents? And then step 4, reflect on these responses. Do they resonate? And how would you answer the questions yourself? Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like that old idea of the 360 evaluation where you get people all around you that can comment? Would you pick friends or work associates or bosses or subordinates or all of the above?
I think it'd be great to get a mix from professional life, personal life, any kind of community spaces that you're involved with. I think it'd be fun and interesting to see what strengths weave their way across the different domains of life, and to see what they all have in common, but also what they what is different, where we might be expressing ourselves differently in different contexts. So if you can get them from different avenues of life, I think that'd be fun. But if you only felt comfortable choosing a sibling and a friend and even just someone well from the coffee shop, you'd be surprised the insight that you can get from just about anyone who knows you.
You've mentioned a couple of times community, that it's something that people want and it's something that you access. What do you mean by community?
That is such a good question. I think what I mean by community is groups of people who have some kind of shared interest. Those can be religious communities, they can be physical communities like where we live, or school communities, they can be professional communities, they can be hobby communities. But I do, it's not just I who thinks that the research, shows that we thrive when in community with others. We're a social species, we're a pod species. So community is something that we've been lacking for the past couple years. And I think most people survived and got through it and found new communities in their more local neighborhood contexts, or even maybe online. But it's definitely something I think we have a deficit in. And I think people are seeking that right now.
One of your contacts posted, and you commented on a point that they made, that they thought that there'd be more complex psychologital and therapeutic-based support and training in companies needed in the future. And sort of comparable to what we've talked about, that this individual said that the reasons why was that people are stressed out, that they're struggling, that they're traumatized, that there's dysfunctional leaders, which I thought was interesting, and employees that create unnecessary stress and frustration in our job. Second, that the pandemic and other recent events have created sort of a collective trauma. Third, that people are believing that the high performance world may not always be possible with all this negative stuff that's going on. And finally, the people are far more clued into mental health. And this individual was suggesting that we have to go past sort of just positive encouragement to something far deeper in mindfulness training, resilience training, competitive advantage, and it sounds like almost offering therapy. Do you really think companies need to do this?
I think it's such an important question to ask and approach to test. We've gotten used to having executive coaches and performance coaches in the workplace, and those are very useful. Companies have adopted bringing in all kinds of helping professionals. Why not therapists? Why not people who can help alleviate suffering? Because what inspired that ringing endorsement for me is this idea that it's hard to put lipstick on a pig in a way. You can bring in all these positive supports, but if people are suffering, if people have wounds, if people have deep anxieties and insecurities that aren't addressed, it's going to impact them on a day-to-day basis. So I hope that companies will make space for therapeutic interventions in the workplace. I think it will benefit everyone.
And you really think, given this list of issues that we talked about in the first segment, and this individual talked about just in that post, are so traumatic and so life-changing that companies almost need to change their attitudes, is what you're thinking?
I think it would be like, why not test that, right? Why not test what it would look like to help people learn how to manage trauma, existential anxiety, insecurity, and all the emotions and thoughts that we have about the world that we live in. Why does that only have to take place, for people who can access it, in their private lives? What if that was offered? And there are many companies.
Most people think of this as sort of a personal thing that you should do, in your own time with a therapist or a coach like yourself, not necessarily something that HR needs to organize within the company.
I mean, if you think about it, so many companies do offer as part of their benefits package access to therapists, social workers, all kinds of helping professionals. So it does exist in the workplace. I guess it depends where you work. And the idea is that people have support from work to access those resources, and they can choose the professionals that they want to engage with. So I think what that post was saying, it would be great if it was as widespread as some of these other kind of corporate initiatives. But if you think about it, it is happening in many workplaces already.
A week ago, you posted something that was very profound. You talked about your father's passing, and you said that you were 31 when your father passed away. He was only 59, which is unbelievably young to pass away. And so my condolences. But that you realized that you might be halfway through your life, and that you asked several questions, which I want to read out. Was I living my life the way I wanted? Was I in line with the values I treasure? If I died tomorrow, would I be satisfied with my contributions? And you decided that you had to make some major shifts in your life to answer those questions. Hell yes, because I guess at the time you wouldn't have, and that it's a daily practice going on. So let me ask you, how did you ask those questions, and how did you change your life?
Yeah, I think, death is the great clarifier.
Death is the great clarifier.
If you've, for anyone who has experienced the loss of someone very, very close to them, it almost always puts things into perspective. The impermanence of life and of everything. And my father's death coincided with, my marriage, and then shortly after the birth of my children, which are also major life events that tend to put new ideas into context. And it was especially, when my first child was born, and I thought, wow, what if I only have, 30 years left? How do I want to spend this time? And at least for me personally, I had to address work, because that took up the most of my time and took me, away from my child, all day, every day. And so for me, it was really a structural question about work, as well as the work I wanted to do, but also how much I wanted to work and who I wanted to work for. And at that time, the biggest shift I made was toward self-employment, and toward being a solopreneur, because I believed if I worked for myself, that I would have the ability to kind of work when I wanted, when I needed, and be more present for my child and my family. I think, and that was, 5 years ago when I started working for myself. Now is like a whole different world, because flexibility is something on everyone's mind, but then that was the way I could get the flexibility. It's so amazing. I think people have more options now, but for me, that was the major change I made. And by shifting the structure of work, I was able to create space for a lot of the other activities I wanted to bring in that were health oriented, hobby oriented, learning oriented, but I had to change the structure of work to allow those to happen.
How did your community react when you stopped working 9 to 5 in a corporate job and started being a coach, a consultant?
That's such a good question. Such a good question. That's a rich question. I think anytime you make a change, that has a ripple effect. Some people are going to look at the change and be like, wow, how'd you pull that off? Like, why'd you do that? You look at how much you're giving up. Look at how much you're putting at risk. That's crazy. And then other people who are like, that's fabulous. I wish I could do that too. So I think anytime you make a big change, it's going to inspire, other people's opinions, other people's judgments about it, and as well as your own. Because, there's always going to be that moment where it's like, I think this is the right thing, but is it, So working with judgment of yourself, judgment of others is something that I think anyone who makes a big change will have to do. The other really interesting thing you asked me about community and how it relates is the new communities I developed through the changes that I made. When I started pursuing my interests in positive psychology and in coaching and taking courses, I created new communities that I never had before that were based on these shared interests. So yeah, it expanded the communities that I became involved in.
What is positive psychology?
So positive psychology is a field of scientific research that looks at the elements of human flourishing. So not just what's wrong with humans and the ailments that we have, but when we're thriving in life, what are those common elements and how can we research them and study them to figure out how to share that information and let other people have more flourishing lives. So the field of positive psychology has many different topics that fall under it, but researchers in that field might look at things like belonging, grit, growth mindset, positive character traits, resilience, mindfulness, meaning, engagement. They might look at all the elements that make up happiness, flourishing, and try to discern what we can learn from them.
Fascinating. We're chatting tonight with Lauren Malach. She is a person that deals with and coaches with disengaged mid-career executives, with other executives that are thinking about making career changes or trying to figure out where they're going in life. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Lauren in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. 2 minutes. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Sagan at 60. We're chatting tonight with Lauren Malach. She helps disengaged executives and mid-career professionals regain a sense of direction, self-belief, and agency in their lives. Wow, that's a big objective, Lauren. How long have you been doing this, Lauren?
Going on 5 years.
And do you have a website that we can go to if we want to check you out?
I do have a website. It's laurenmalachcoaching.com.
laurenmalachcoaching.com. And I found you, I guess, through LinkedIn. And so that's another good way of getting connected with you and following your posts that are really quite stimulating. Do you have to take any courses and certificates or anything like that to become a coach in this area?
Great question. I took courses and certifications to become a coach in this area. The first course I took was a course in positive psychology. It was an applied certificate of positive psychology. And that was a course that kind of gave me a broad perspective on the field, on the research that's happening, and on the tools that the practitioners in that field use to help their clients, grow and develop themselves. And then after that, I took a coaching certification course, which taught me the tools of coaching as a way to support people in their personal and professional development and growth. And that's a field that I continue to take courses on and pursue accreditation in the coaching model because I love it. So yes, I took courses.
What are some of these tools? You talk about these tools that help us figure things out. What are the tools? Like, I don't lie down on a couch in your office and have you ask me a bunch of questions. Do you? Like, what happens?
So I can talk about the tools that I use from positive psychology, and then I can talk about the tools that I use from coaching. the tools that I use from positive psychology to help people identify what they want to do next, what's important to them, are, I'll kind of run through them for you to give you a picture of what my clients
Okay,
are.
sure.
Yeah. So, well, we talked about strengths earlier. So I help my clients identify a few different types of strengths they have within themselves. One is their transferable skills, things they're really good at that they have developed over time. And a tool that I would use to help clients identify their skills is have them write me or tell me 5 stories of moments that they're really proud of from work, from their private lives, things they've accomplished. And together we will pull apart those stories to try and figure out what skills they were using at those times when they were at their best. So that's an example of a tool. It's a narrative tool, I guess you could say.
Okay.
I also use external assessments to help people identify their strengths. So one of the most popular ones that I use is called this Clifton Strengths Finder. And this was an assessment made by the Gallup organization, which is a large, professional organization that does many surveys, and they have all kinds of tools. The Clifton Strengths Assessment helps people identify their strengths within the work context by answering, dozens of questions that kind of slot you into your top strengths. I also help people look at their values. I use values as a tool to help them figure out what's important to them. A lot of the tools I use require reflection, writing, brainstorming, and then we look at the results together to kind of really try to hone in on, which keywords again resonate with them the most. So those are some of the tools I help to help people figure out what they're doing when they're happy, when they're thriving, when they're at their best, and how to translate those skills and values into a picture of what they might want to do next.
Good. That's interesting because most people focus on problems and when they're sad, and that's where their focus tends to be more often.
Absolutely. And it is also very important to identify the ways we get in our own way, the obstacles that we face, because again, I can help someone figure out what their resources are, the ways in which they can help themselves. But if their obstacles are so big that they don't know how to get around them, it's not very helpful. So another tool I use is to help people figure out the ways that they get in their own way and the obstacles that they have so that we can figure out how to manage those obstacles. And so there are tools for that, tools for identifying weaknesses or habits that we've developed that kind of keep us stuck.
In our last segment, we chatted a little bit about the passing of your father and how that was an impactful, obviously, part of your life catalyst towards you thinking about the meaning of life and things like that. But then you actually posted another really provocative, profound post that made me think a lot a couple of days ago. You talked about the death of a dream, and that a death of a dream can, in a way, be sadder than that of a human being, of a living being. And you said that when a living being dies, we have rituals to help us say goodbye, to grieve, and to remember them. But when a dream dies, something we've given our heart, sweat, and hope to, we have few tools to process the loss, and that you've still experienced the death of a dream. The person that you hoped that you would love but didn't, or the calling you worked for that didn't call you back, or the idea that you tried to realize but couldn't bring to life, and that you thought that it was important to grieve unfulfilled dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. Have you had dreams that have gone away? And how did you deal with it?
Yeah, it's a line that struck me from a short story that I was reading. And it resonated because in my work with clients, we sometimes happen upon an unrealized dream or the death of a dream. And often putting it into those words begins to help people see it in a new way and begins to help them let go of it. But yes, of course, I personally, have experienced the death of a dream. I think we all have. No one gets through life without loss. No one gets through life without youthful dreams being dashed, whether they be as seemingly inconsequential as having a massive crush on someone who, doesn't like you back, to trying to build a company culture based on values and watching it not succeed. We all have hopes that drive us that are never realized. And there is a loss to it, but we don't always name it that way. We don't always see it that way.
And so part of it is just recognizing that. And I guess the other part is as you say, grieving it. But do you say goodbye, or do you try to resurrect it and bring it back to life?
Yeah, such a good question. You know what I was just thinking of? I was thinking about how on our last call, you were talking about how you wanted to be the prime minister, or you wanted to be in politics, and the dream of kind of that. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I have a perfect answer to your question. It depends. It depends. It's also what you have control over and what you don't. If you love someone and they don't love you back, you can't keep knocking on that door, right? But then again, there are some dreams that aren't dead. I met someone last week who became a bodybuilder at the age of 55, 60. You should have him on your show. I mean, there are new dreams born all the time. So the question of whether you should let go or whether you should hang on is a very personal one, and it's a circumstantial one. But I'm also fascinated by the idea of new dreams that are still, unborn.
You commented about an author's post and the book called How to Create a More Human World. The Future is Analog by David Sachs. And you said, so exciting. It's going to change the way we think about the future and influence how we behave on the present or in the present. And I guess this book, I gather this not from the book, but from your comments, is that it's about that lots of people thought that we'd become a digital world because of the pandemic. And he's arguing, and you're arguing, that we're going to become more of a human world. Do you really believe that?
Well, first of all, I should disclose that David Sachs is my husband. So I have, obviously think very highly of his work. But just this morning, we were talking about the companies that at the beginning of the pandemic, their stocks were going straight up. And as of this week, all their stocks are going way down. And those are companies like Zoom, Netflix, Peloton, all of these, digital, virtual companies that benefited from us being shut in our homes when digital was the only channel that we could access community and, connection. But I do believe that humans, we live in the real world. We live in the tangible world. We live in the world of real things. And I do think people want that more and more, especially after the last years, and especially in the world of chaos and uncertainty that you painted at the beginning of this show.
Well, it's interesting because you actually posted you posted a picture of what people imagine when they say work-life balance, and you talk about chaos. Most people think that work-life balance is between a job and life on a teeter-totter. And what your post was that the reality is it's a combination of networking, volunteering, drinks with friends, hobbies, health, jobs, versus guilty pleasures, grocery shopping, chores, travel, love, family. And I didn't see job anywhere in there.
Is it not in there?
No.
That's funny. I wish I drew that. I feel like those people that draw those images that so clearly articulate an idea, I admire that skill so greatly. I will always celebrate those and share those online because they communicate a human truth so much better than words can sometimes. But yeah, it's not just work and life. It's all the many things that we want and must spend our time doing.
You know, one of the things that I find interesting about you is a lot of people will just post a couple of things on LinkedIn or social media. You repost a lot of things that other people say. Why do you do that?
I think the reason I do that is because if I get excited about an idea, I like to share it. And I certainly am not the creator of all these ideas. I'm just the channel, to share things I find interesting. So I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Other people say it better than me. Other writers think about it clearer, write about it clearer. And I love to share the work of others, and see where it lands with the people who are accessing those ideas either through me or alongside me.
You quoted, I presume this is your son, and you said that your 5-year-old said, "Francis dumped me." And you asked, "What do you mean?" And the 5-year-old said, "I asked her to marry me." And she said, "No." And you said, "Oh, how did you feel about that?" And your 5-year-old said, "Oh, fine, I'm going to ask Parker to marry me." And you asked the question, imagine if we all handled rejection so well. Imagine if we looked at rejection with acceptance and trust, with the knowledge that it's okay and we're enough and better is in store. Do you really believe that?
Which do I believe what? That it would be better for us to handle it with more humor and resilience?
Yeah. And just, if one says no, move on to the next.
I do believe that. I'm not saying that I've mastered that. In fact, I think it's something that we maybe, have when we're young and then we forget. But I do, what did they say? Wisdom in babes. I find sometimes
wisdom in babes.
Yeah. Isn't there a statement like that?
I don't know. Sounds good.
Sometimes the kids are so wise and we could really learn a lot from them.
How many kids do you have?
2.
And one of them just walked in with a nice note?
Yeah.
What did it say?
So cute. You see that? It says, "I love you."
We all could, we could all get messages like that. There's no question.
Yeah.
Then you made a post about being in the doldrums and in ruts, and that when you're feeling melancholy and motionless, that it's something you've heard a lot lately. And then you asked the question about when you feel stuck, how do you shake things up? Do you go for a walk, reach out to a friend, accept that wins are sometimes scarce? How do you deal with the doldrums?
I mean, I guess those are the things I do. I think we try to make things better, but one of the approaches that I think we need to include in that is accepting that things aren't always positive, aren't always good, aren't always moving forward. Accepting that part of life is suffering and is having times of struggle. And when we accept that, at least we don't, beat ourselves up for being human. And sometimes the acceptance, I think, gives us the motivation isn't the right word, but let's go with that, to take a walk, right? To reach out to a friend, to do the things that, maybe can help us feel better.
And you also said that one of the keys is keeping the long-term view, that you always keep your goals, your long-term goals ahead of you and take small steps toward them.
Yeah. That was, I think I might have thought of that from reading someone else's LinkedIn post. It's interesting, how you can be influenced by what other people say. Someone said it was something along the lines of, when I feel frustrated, whether, let's say I feel frustrated with my progress in a certain area. And this person, when they wrote, said, "Am I thinking in days, months, or years?"
And what's the answer?
I think if we're getting frustrated with our progress, when I think about it personally, it's because I'm thinking very short term. I'm thinking in days. Whereas when I when I zoom out and I begin to think in years, I take a deep breath, I get back on the mat and I practice again and again.
You also said that you had seen a bunch of trends in your coaching business and that it was one of 3 things. the decentering of work, the desire for work to be a part of one's life, but not the centerpiece. 2, burn it all down, the desire to completely restructure one's life in order to have work take up less time and energy. And 3, a frustration or a question about who am I if I'm not a executive, teacher, partner, CEO, etc. And so therefore that people need to have an identity and worth outside of work. Now, this is clearly a process you've gone through as you've left the corporate world and become a coach, but is it truly something that you've found lots of other people challenged with?
Yes. In North America, work has become the channel through which many of us gain a strong portion of our identity and who we are and our significance in the world. There's a fantastic article in The Atlantic, which if I didn't post on LinkedIn, I'll post next week, by a writer called Derek Thompson, and he calls it Workism. And he kind of makes the case that as religious communities began to shrink, our identification with communities at work and our profession began to grow. And that has some consequences, right? If we identify ourselves with work, he was making the case too that because of our strong identification at work, it causes us to put it on such a pedestal in our life and to give it so much time and so much energy to the expense of our health, our well-being, our families, our hobbies. Technology supports that. So we're always connected to work. And the reason it's problematic is that when you can't work the same pace anymore, or you don't want to work the same pace, or you don't want to work in the same field, it's like an identity crisis, and it goes back to what you asked me earlier. How did people react when you stepped away, right? And it's like, who are you if you're not this professional anymore? And so the trends are connected because people desire to pull away from work, but they're scared to, because so much of who they believe they are and who they're seen to be is tied up in what they do.
We're chatting tonight with Lauren Malach. She is a coach for disengaged midlife, mid-career executives and other executives that she helps regain a sense of direction and self-belief and agency in their lives and in their careers. We're going to take a short break, a final short break for some messages, and come back with some concluding comments with Lauren in just a minute. Thank you so much. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Coach Lauren Malach, who is a coach for disengaged executives and midlife professionals that are looking for some meaning in their life and their careers and trying to figure out what they really want to do. Just a couple of miscellaneous posts that I thought were kind of interesting that you posted recently. You talked about listening, and you did it by way of a joke that someone in an interview was asked what their lifelong goals were, and they said, my biggest challenge is I don't listen. So listening is obviously a critical trait. How do you teach people to listen?
Oh, that's a great question. Listening is a superpower that if you can even do 10% more of, I think, you will improve your relationships. You will improve how people perceive you. I think listening is just such an important skill. So what was the question? Oh, for listening, what was the question? How do people improve their listening skills?
How do you think you can improve your listening?
I think the way you improve your listening skills is just by putting your hands down, zipping it and just actually practicing listening. The main thing that will get in the way is taming the monster in your mind that is telling you, you have something to say about this. I have some advice on this. I can offer something of value here, but just really trying to take in rather than, push out. Because when you listen to people, you will just get so many benefits. And it's a strategic advantage to be a good listener.
I used to work for Jimmy Pattison, a self-made 10 billion billionaire, who used to tell me the old line about God gave us two ears and one mouth so that we would listen twice as often. And then someone would always say, yeah, but in addition, God gave us a mouth that can close, can be zipped, and ears that are always open. And so we're listening all the time. We can take our turns talking or not. But I found myself the most effective way to truly, and it's, sort of back to that line, first seek to understand before you seek to be understood, is repeat back something. Because if you repeat back, number one, it proves that you were listening, and it forces your brain to bring out this, what at least you think is the salient point the other person is making, and then also to make sure that they're aware that you were actually listening and heard their salient point. Because people want to talk, but they also want to be heard, and too often. People aren't heard. Another interesting comment that you made was you repeated an article that someone said too much focus on STEM means that one of the biggest things recruiters are looking for today are people that can write. Have we lost the ability to write?
Yeah, I mean, writing is a communication skill. I guess it's much like listening. And I think writing is such an important skill. How do you communicate your ideas? How do you sell your ideas? How do you gain trust if you can't write? So I don't know whether we're losing our ability to write, but if you think about the ways in which we write now in texts, in emails, I wonder if the way we're writing is changing. And even in my own experience, it is so difficult to sit down and write an article, or an essay or some kind of long, deep, thoughtful argument. So I do think that all the ways that we write now that are so quick and short and tight, I think it is impacting the way we communicate and the ability to write in more deep ways.
Last question. Someone said that one of the things they're working on that you commented on again was to unlearn a desire to get gold stars. So it's sort of, I guess, this achievement belief system, culture that we have lived in. Do you think we have to unlearn this desire to get gold stars?
So that, yes, exactly. That's a good friend of mine named Jessica Lax, who runs this kind of unlearning program. I think certain people do need to unlearn that. I think we all need to unlearn something. But yes, as a society, I think we're very oriented to achievement, success, and often a very limited version of that. Achievement is very important. I think we all want to feel like we are achieving our goals, but I think it's important to make sure that what we are pursuing and what we want to achieve is actually motivated internally rather than by some kind of external standard.
Lauren Malach, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's been a really interesting conversation with you tonight, and you've opened up a lot of thinking, a lot of ideas. If others want to contact you and access your thinking and your coaching, how's best to do that?
Thank you. Well, yes. I mean, we talked a lot about LinkedIn. So join the conversation today on LinkedIn. We're always having conversations and connecting you to, other thoughtful people out there. So I'm at Lauren Malach. That's my handle. And it's MALACH. And you can also check out my website, which is Lauren Malach Coaching. Those are the two places where you can learn more about me, and definitely on LinkedIn, where I'm very active in conversations. If you want to jump in, I'd be so excited to hear what people, think about the ideas I'm putting out there.
Lauren Malach, thank you so much for joining us. If I could just conclude with a couple of thoughts of my own. I do think that we've gone through a bunch of changes in the last couple of years, and the pandemic and working from home or hybrid has been clearly one of the most important parts of that. But I think also, the trucker convoy and this desire that not everyone, but a certain minority, 10-15% of the population had for freedom, and a freedom that is sort of more like an American style of freedom. But it's a desire that some Canadians clearly had, versus this other desire that some people had about sort of doing the right thing, maybe not for themselves, but for their community. And I think that sort of balance or counterbalance of the two different sort of streams in society has been a challenge and has been interesting. I think that people have had, and I was speaking with a divorce lawyer last week who said that divorces are at an all-time high, and that divorce lawyers are in incredible demand because so many people got tired of living with their spouse during in the last 2 years, when we all of a sudden spent a lot more time with whoever it was that we were living with. And so, the pandemic and living with people nonstop, and I think primarily moms that had to take care of kids in school become quasi teachers at the same time as they were trying to keep their jobs and work. And then I think, and maybe this isn't everybody, but I think a lot of us have been really focused and disturbed by what's happening in Ukraine, and that we never thought that what we read about in the history books and saw in movies about what happened in World War II could ever happen again, and it's happening now. And whether it's rape or torture or complete destruction of communities and buildings and homes, it's shocking. And so I do think that a lot of people are going through a lot of rethinking about what's important in life, and whether it's with help of Lauren Malach or some of her suggestions or other people, I think it's a good time to think about the future. And we've gone through Passover and Easter and Ramadan, so all three major religions have been going through a season of thinking about the future, about rebirth, about resurrection, about overcoming and escaping from the past. So, Lauren Malach, thanks for stimulating our brains and our minds. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and video casts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. I've got videos up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Check out my YouTube channel. And I got my podcasts on Apple, Audible, and Speakeasy Podcasts. Thanks, everyone. Good night. Have a great weekend.